Since you were last here, the Jester finally starts to look like a real car. We have a body shell sitting on the chassis, so it actually starts to look like more than a bag of bolts. It isn't finally fitted on though. We have to take the body shell off a few times to set things up. We've still got to fit the rear luggage tray, so we've got to set all that up. We've still got to do some work. We've got to fit the exhaust and things like that. But the job that's causing us the most grief at the moment is fitting the heater, which I'll come back to in a minute. Now, in order to get the shell to this stage, what we've had to do is nibble away around the suspension towers here and also around the steering column, just so it'll sit down nice and square on the chassis. But eventually, what we're going to have to do when we fit it to finally and bond it in, we're going to have to open these out even more because it needs to sit a little bit lower. So we need to cut a little bit away from the back here and open these out so they'll sit down below these rubbers. And also at the front and around the wheel arches and at the back, we have to bond in some fiberglass panels which will actually make a strong bond between the body and the chassis, so it's going to be a very strong unit at the end of the day. Right now we're working on the heater. We have hidden under here a heater box which I've got currently mounted on blocks of foam to get it to the desired height. I have drilled or ground a slot in the bulkhead which caused a nice few sparks, and it looked quite spectacular at the time. But that's so we can get the tubes from the heater box through to the radiator and the engine, so that we can have a through flow of hot water. Now, the reason why the heater is so important, apart from keeping my tootsies warm in the winter, is that we have to have demisting for the windscreen, and this is where we've hit a few snags. Now, traditionally with kit cars, what people have done is taken whatever's on the donor car, i.e. big plastic tubes which are quite big and bulky, and they've mounted them under the dashboard somehow and fitted the plastic clips that were fitted to the dashboard on the donor. Well, I've tried to be a little smarter, probably a little too smart for my own good, and I've come up with these aluminium boxes. Now, they're made up of dead bits of caravan. This is actually aluminium taken from a dead caravan, which is very thin and very pliable and very easily bent. And what I've made is these little tubes, 5 inches by 2 deep, and the first one is already sat underneath here on top of the heater box, and that runs all the way along the top here, so that when I fit the windscreen and actually set that up, all I have to do is cut my little slots, having bonded in my little tube, and I should have a nice clean through flow of air and nice blast of hot air hitting the windscreen, which is the desired thing. The worst thing you can have is anything blocking the way, so hopefully that's going to work. So we're going to have that taped in place and then eventually take the body shell off and bond that in place. Now at the front we were going to cut a hole into the bulkhead here so that we can get a clean through flow of air into the heater box, because there's a fan about there and an intake. But it occurred to me that with the bonnet in place, that's going to restrict airflow to start with, and also with the windscreen you're just going to have water running in and straight into the heater, which isn't really desirable, especially with the electric motor sitting on top. So I've resorted to another of my little aluminium tubes. This is going to be bonded in underneath the body shell, right up there, and it's going to be a little further over. We have a hole for the intake and the little electric fan, and at the side here the chassis gets panelled off. So what I'm going to do is, when I panel up the chassis, leave a little hole, this slides along, gets bonded into the body shell, and we have an intake that comes from underneath the wheel arch. Now, the idea of this is that A, you don't get any water running in, you get a nice big tube of air for the heater to suck into, and hopefully that's all going to work. I'll keep you posted.